Welcome, everyone.
Hey guys, I'm Larry Flick from Sirius XM, and it's nice to have you all here at this beautiful shop. I've never been here before, but I'll be definitely coming back. What's the name? How do you say the name of this place again?
Maison Atia.
See,
Right?
I'm an ugly white boy from the Bronx. I don't know how to say such fancy words.
Atia. Atia. Excuse me. That's not how Chloe says it.
Maison Atia?
Well, it depends. If it's a French man, it's Atia. If
Okay.
it's, someone from New York.
From some Chicago. Atia. Atia.
It's like harder
Maison
shot.
Atia.
Well, it's a beautiful place in Midtown Manhattan, Madison Avenue, between 70 and 69th Street. And I've had the chance to look around. It's a gorgeous place. And we have some wonderful friends and family of Billy Corgan's joining us today to have a special peek into his new solo album, which is called Cotillions. Before we hear the music, we're going to have a conversation. We have some fan questions, but Billy, let's start with the obvious, get it out of the way. Why is it called Cotillions?
I never divulge the reasons anymore.
I like that. But of course, you know, my job as a journalist is to say...
I appreciate the question. No, I found through the years if I say anything, it gets twisted and becomes fact, and then I spend the rest of my life answering for a distorted fact. So I've learned just better not to say anything.
I totally get that. So what I actually want to know is, when did you start assembling these songs in a way that started to take shape into an album? Because I get the feeling that you're the kind of guy who starts with some ideas and then they morph, and then suddenly, before you know it, you're in an album.
Sure. I took a trip down Route 66 in America from Chicago to Los Angeles about 3 years ago, and that trip was involved in what became the OG Lala album. I took a subsequent trip a couple years ago, which we documented in a series called 30 Days. We did a documentary a day. You can see that on YouTube if you're interested. And that was the trip which these songs started being written on that actual trip. So if you actually watch the series, you can hear me, on the day of coming up with certain songs. And you get a sense of kind of a pastoral visual riff of what I was taking in that sort of formed the foundational basis for the songs.
Were you finding that there was an itch in the back of your head that you needed to scratch, something that you felt compelled to say that needed to be said as you with your full name as opposed to a Smashing Pumpkins record?
Well, for me, I mean, for years I've said that to me there's no difference between Smashing Pumpkins and whatever else I call it. I don't really understand why fans have such a problem understanding the different worlds. I understand the personality kind of crisis that goes on, like if so-and-so's in the room and so-and-so's not in the room. For me, it's all the same because in almost every case they're my songs. So I don't really delineate. But that being said, this being my second, actually my third, there's a first solo album that I've never put out that's sitting in a can somewhere. So this is technically my third solo acoustic record. Only two have been released, or about to release, sorry. Tired. Where am I going with this? I actually only just now feel that it is different. So I have to go back and unwind everything I just said, because I do feel now that there's a different voice that's coming out as a solo acoustic or a solo artist as opposed to the Pumpkins. But I just feel that for the first time. And that's after working for years as a solo artist.
Well, it's interesting because to listen to the solo songs, to me, it is braver because it is your voice without a lot of distraction. Mm-hmm. Right? Without a lot of...
Are you calling my band a distraction?
No, but I am saying it's easy to create sound around words that will kind of create a little bit of safety for you. Mm. And in the acoustic music, it's as raw and as naked as an artist can be. And I think that there's a difference.
Yeah.
I do sincerely think that when you play with a bunch of people, just by the nature of different human beings touching the words in the music, even if they're only playing behind you, there's a cushion that you don't have when you're standing by yourself.
Yeah, and I do, when I record solo acoustic, I record the takes live. So it really is raw, unvarnished music. Where with the Pumpkins, it's always been this process of kind of, it's like a fantasy. You're creating a sound that doesn't exist from a band that in many ways doesn't exist. You're you're trying to create this impressionistic deco thing. The layering of the guitars and the wailing banshee stuff. So, I feel it really is like being on a different planet for sure.
When I listen to the music you make in this realm that we're going to be hearing today, it reminds me of when I discovered music as a teenage boy, filled with questions, filled with angst, and listening to music in my headphones alone. And it's almost like thoughts inside your head as opposed to external noise. Some of the songs, we've already heard some of the songs from this album live, and they feel more like thoughts than proclamations. Is that a fair interpretation?
I don't know. It's more akin to me to writing poetry. It takes a kind of a shape out of a cloud. But unlike rock music, you're not trying to finish the cloud. It's okay that it just kind of hangs in the air and it is what it is. Like haiku, 5 lines,
Yeah.
The tree fell, I cried, like sometimes there's something about the incompleteness of the thought that is more commensurate to how you feel than trying to always wrap it up like a movie with a happy ending.
Well, because
or a big bang, like most rock songs have to have the big bang ending,
Well, emotions tend to be fractured and fragmented, right? They tend to
especially in this mind. Yeah.
So how do you decide what is fodder for people to know, and what will?
I don't discern.
You don't discern.
No,
if it lands in your brain, it falls through your process and out, and people hear it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the only delineating line would be something pornographic or something, And even I was thinking, because I still would like to write books. I wish we lived in a culture that was open, voiced as the world that William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg were in, where they said these things that were, were kind of confusing and at times horrific. We live in this culture now of reductionist and words being sort of the mainline weapon in meme culture. And so I'm really attracted now to the idea that I can speak my heart through the poetry. And like I said, it only becomes censorious when I feel like, it's over some sort of line that has to do with offense. Beyond that, I just speak whatever I speak, and I don't always even have to understand it myself.
There are times when I find myself listening to music or reading a book, and I think that I'm absorbing things differently because I'm a man in my 50s versus when I was a man in my teens and 20s and so on. And then I kind of track who I am really. And all I am is really just a recycled pattern from those days. And I say all of that to ask you, do you feel any different than the kid who first started to play with words and melodies?
That's a fantastic question. I'll give you a slightly different answer to the question. If you look at most artists that are world recognized, a Picasso or a Matisse, there's a consistent voice that rings through the work. And if you follow the entire arc of their life, you'll see the maturation of their voice and the maturation of their life, but their voice never loses sort of a consistent, I'm thinking of a water drop, a tensile, tension. Mm-hmm. There's a tension in a true artist's voice. And so at some point, I realized that what wasn't progressive in my voice was the thing that's hardwired. One of my favorite things to point out is Picasso painted the Madonna 42 times. He came back to the image of the Madonna again and again and again. And at some point I had to allow myself to be repetitive because that was the part of my voice that was still, that was my son, seeking clarification, like a crystallization of, let's call it, and then the other stuff I feel is more like cultural riffraff, kind of the milieu of the day. The patois of the day kind of floats in and out. As I've grown older, I try to less and less refer to the culture because I understand how transitory the culture really is. When you're young, the culture feels very fixed. You realize the culture is essentially a phantasm. It's somebody's creation. One day they're wearing platforms and the next they're wearing sandals. It's just the way it works. So I'm very focused on what I'm obsessive about, and what I consistently return to thematically. And then I kind of watch, like, let's call it the slang that sort of slides in and out over the voice. And I see that over time now. So yes, the voice is the same, but I'm a completely different person. So it's weird because that which is consistent in me is almost frightening to me, because what is that? Because I have changed, but that doesn't change, if that makes any sense at all.
It makes perfect sense. And so the question I then have to follow is, how peaceful are you with the part that will not change?
Well, that's why I'm here. That's the way I look at it. People get uncomfortable when people use the word gift, like, you know, I'm gifted or I've been gifted. But when I watch a world-class figure skater, I don't begrudge them the gift. I accept that they've been given an acumen that places them in a certain place that I could never get. So I'm very comfortable with recognizing that I've been given a perfect gift that's worked for me. And I've had to hone it and I've had to craft it, but the diamond part of the gift, the inner part of the voice, is something that I can only akin to God, because I do not understand it. I do not understand why the words come the way they do. I do not understand why the music comes the way it comes. I can be an auteur and sort of like, that's kind of interesting, or I can pick and poke at it. But the consistency of that and the way people have been consistently attracted to that voice, that's the most humbling part of the process. So on one hand, I can say, like, wow, I've been given some acumen that's fascinating, because why? Like, what was that, and where did that come from? You know, of course, I would point to the heavens. Other people say, oh, you just got genetically lucky, you know, or whatever. I don't even care either way, like, however you want to describe it. But that's the part I kind of sit back and I don't really understand, because it's like being born with like a inner nuclear dynamo or something that just keeps generating energy, and it doesn't stop. It hasn't stopped. I mean, I'm 30 plus years, and I'm thinking, you know, I have 41 songs coming out in the next year. I mean, that's hardly somebody slowing down.
No, that's a lot of music.
Yeah.
When did you stop questioning the gift and just allow it?
Probably not till my 40s, and that was after I tried to get rid of it, because for a while I blamed it for all the problems in my life. You know, it's like the classic myth of the you know, be careful what you wish for. You know, like you know, the guy they say, the genie says, what do you want? I want a million gold coins, and then the guy's buried beneath the gold coins. Well, for a while I felt like I'd been buried by the gift, because the gift had caused me so many problems. It was more about my lack of ability to manage the gift. And then once I figured that out, then I was happy to return back to letting it tell me what to do. But beyond that, no, for many years I felt like it was like something like a force that I could not control, because it wouldn't do what I wanted it to do. You know, it's not convenient. Any artist will tell you, you know, the muse, or, you know, whatever, the voice in your head, it doesn't work on demand. It's not a button you press. And there are fallow periods, and there are periods that are inexplicably there's an absence of clear thought. And then you start to look at the moon and the planets, and you start to understand that's just the nature of life. You cannot always be in the right spot at the right time. Culture, particularly this culture, I mean, here we are in the epicenter of on-demand culture, Manhattan. You know, culture tells you must always be there. It must always be the best. But we know from nature that there must be a winter. You know, the winter does follow the spring. So once you accept it and you kind of start to ride with that, then you realize there's this incredibly rich vein of documenting the rise, the summit, and the fall. And once you allow that to happen, well, then there's no end to the story that you can tell. And that's sorry to interrupt you, but that's what I love about folk music, is it accepts the natural state of the human race, that it is about the rise and the fall, that we accept the blues, you know, where pop is so much about ding, 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 you know, lights are always on. Folk is inherently about the human condition, and that's what I love. I love the documentation of that. It's really fantastic.
Well, I want to get to folk, but I have another follow-up to the first part before we get to that, and that is, I assume you believe, since you seem to believe in higher powers, do you believe in fate, destiny, things that you can't control?
I would say if I remember learning this in school. I don't know if it was Pluto or was it? It was like there's like Aristotle, and there's like the different veins of thought. I can't remember, but my general thought is we're given a script, but we have the power to change it. So if we don't do anything to change it, well, the script will play itself out for the most part. But we do have the power to change it. So it's not completely hardwired. But that said, at some point I had to accept I was never going to play in the NBA. I didn't have that skill set. So there are certain things that you can't, let's say, outpace your ability. But within the lane that you're given, I think you have a lot of latitude.
Well, you're talking about the difference between fantasy and fact, right? The fantasy is to be able to play in the NBA. The fact is that your real destiny is to be a poet, to make music. So when do you see your destiny coalescing with a mission? Because one of the things that's happened with your music over the years, one of the things that I've been acutely aware of this week as I've been preparing to come see you, talking to people, friends of mine whose lives have been affected by your music, fans who found out that I'm going to be here, they want to know things, is that this is bigger than, oh, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. Everybody is given a mission, it's just a matter of whether or not you accept it. What's your mission?
I think for a while I had a bit of a complex that I was supposed to do something, like a Pied Piper. There's a lot of Pied Pipery references in the 90s stuff, because it's like, am I supposed to lead these wastrels out of the trailer park that I came from? And then, of course, when they abandoned me, then I got mad, because I felt like, well, here I was ready to lead you out of the trailer park, and maybe you don't want out of the trailer park. And there was this tussle that went on. I eventually came to the conclusion that the best way that I can serve is to be the best at what I can do, and it's more about being an attractor. And I'll try to clarify that slightly. Coming from Generation X, which really is in many, many ways a lost generation. It has not really asserted its power outside of one shining moment in the early 90s. We're undermanned in that the generation before and the generation after, I think, are almost, it's not exactly accurate, but simply put, the generation before and the generation after are double population. So Generation X doesn't even have much voting power because there's just not enough of us. And then the ad agencies at some point figured out there was no point in even advertising in Generation X because they don't know what they want. Because it was more of like an independent thing. Like, I want to think I'm independent while I'm wearing the flannel shirt, whatever. So what I realized, if there's a mission statement that has codified itself over 30 years for me, it's that if I can lead by clean living, clear thought, independent thought, and kind of like, hey, it's better to be yourself than to be somebody else. As simple as that sounds, that seems to be the one thing that resonates through. Like, don't die, be a good person, be a good parent, lead in your community with things that you believe in. Don't speak falsely. That seems to work for my people, if there is a people. And at some point, you also have to understand, if you are in some sort of mission, if to use your parlance, there are a lot of people who don't recognize either the right of you to lead anything, much less they don't even like what you do, so they don't even understand what the hell you're talking about. So you can't get caught up in that, because that gets into a whole host of other satanic things that involve trying to attract those who are attracted to bright, shiny objects. We do live in a culture that is quickly separating itself from the material and the spiritual. In my lifetime, it's never been more obvious. And so if you're on let's call it the more spiritual, because I'm still in a commercial construct, but if you live on the more spiritual side of the street, like here, my partner Chloe's shop, they're trying to be part of the change while balancing, the material. So it's not a rejective thing, like, well, we're over here and you can all slide into hell. You try to be an attractor and say, there is a better way to do this. You can be kind in business. You can look at sustainable things. You can look at economies that are both commercial in the classic capitalistic sense, but they're entropic in that they feed back in. You don't have to attach false causes to it. You can say, look, we're trying to create a system here where our freedom equals your freedom, and this can work together. Hence the new model of the artist in the 21st century, peer-to-peer. Hey, look, we're talking to people directly.
Yeah.
We don't have to go through a network. We don't even have to go through your network. We can just speak to people directly. They can do with it what they want. They can chop it up. They can put little funny faces on us and
little
mouse heads, and they can do whatever they want. No, but I'm saying there's a beauty to that freedom.
Yes.
And so, to try to wrap up my long-winded answer here, it's like the only way to stay centered in that is to have some kind of inner spiritual root that tells you, if I'm doing any good, well, here's how I would do good.
Well, here's this. This goes right into the tone of this record, and why I think it's important, and why I think there is a huge difference between a Smashing Pumpkins record and a William Patrick Corgan record. To me, a William Patrick Corgan record, Cotillions in particular, is a pulling away of the shiny. It's investing in folk as not just as a musical idiom, but as a way of communicating with people. Folk was one of the original ways that people communicated. Troubadours were the first storytellers. They were the first documentarians of our country. They were the first people who would go from town to town to town and talk about what they saw. The tour that you're just about to finish is, to me, akin to a troubadour's tour, because what you're doing in this very lean scenario is telling stories and truth in the most intimate way to people who are interested, and then they go out and they share it. And then they go out and they talk about it. Whether they write about it, they post about it, they tweet about it, whatever they're doing. It is a very pure sense of communication. And to me, it harks directly to what you said your actual mission is, which is to be a good person. To be a person who does the right things, and hopefully someone will notice that, and that'll matter to them. What was it, when did you first start to, you and I were talking before we came up here about discovering folk music. And I was telling you that I found it by way of like the SoCal writers like Jackson Browne and Little Feat and Lowell George, but you had a different way of discovering it. How did you discover it?
Well, my father was always completely dismissive of the music that his family listened to, because he felt some, shame's not the right word. He wasn't happy with being, a hillbilly, his word. And so he ascribed that music that his mother or his family listened to as the kind of music that people of a lower standard class listen to. Like, in essence, yeah, you listen to songs about people drinking beer and beating their wives because they're drinking beer and they're beating their wives. And he was attracted to, I think, more the spiritual rooted message of R&B and soul, and that's the music that he was really vastly more interested in. Sorry, I thought you were going to show me something.
No, I was just looking to make sure. I'm timekeeping while we're talking.
So I had this kind of inner bias about country, folk, whatever you call it, bluegrass. Shit kicker music. That's what those people listen to. And yeah, they're your family, but avoid the pickup truck, basically. And then, of course, I also grew up in a time where we saw, like in many genres, not just in country, the commercialization and the codification of what, the countrypolitan sound became this, the new gloss of the 70s became the kind of the big reverb drum of the 80s, in pop. And so I never thought to go back outside of maybe listening to a Hank Williams record, to go back and really dig through that root and understand that particularly country really was early rock and roll, that there's much more connection there, where I'd always been told it was blues, 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 blues. And you realize that, the beauty of Elvis was he took Hank Williams and he took, Crudup is the name, he recorded the first single, but is it Arthur Crudup?
Yeah.
Right. He took Arthur Crudup and he put those two things together. He put Little Richard together with Hank Williams. And that's the beauty of Elvis. He put those two veins together and he made them crystalline. I just thought it was just blues, blues, blues. Listen to Led Zeppelin, you go, oh, I got to go listen to Howlin' Wolf. I never thought to go back and listen to, I don't know, Arlo Guthrie or, his cousin Jack or, whoever, all the people I listen to now, the Stanley Brothers, the Delmore Brothers. Even when you listen to the Delmore Brothers, you realize, oh, that's where the Everly Brothers came from. To me, the Everly Brothers in 1956 or whenever they popped out of a hole, they were born that way. It never occurred to me that there'd be an antecedent to them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But you listen to Delmore Brothers, there's a clear line from early rural Dust Bowl blues through the Delmores, straight to the Everly Brothers, straight to the Beatles. Never occurred to me that there would be a vein backwards. So only later in life did I discover all this music. And not only did I discover it and be sort of shocked that it was rich and varied, I found I really loved it, and I found it connected me more to my family story. You know, them being, my grandfather literally was a coal miner and a bootlegger and a sharecropper and all that. I mean, I literally come from those things that those people sang about. So the stories I heard and the way they walked and talked and the things they intimated and the horrific Southern Gothic stuff that they would talk about, suddenly I'm listening to the music that they were in, and I get it now. So it put all the pieces together for me much later in life.
Did you find yourself looking at your family differently?
Yes. Yeah. I went from being kind of judgy, like, what was that about, to, oh, now I get it. Life was really hard for those people. And that's not to excuse their behavior. It's just to say, that was really hard. That was really, really hard. Those are hard lives that those people lived.
You don't have to forgive as much as you should understand.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I didn't understand. For example, my grandmother, here's a quick story. My grandmother passed away a couple years ago at 102. This is my father's mother I'm talking about, Lillian. Lillian was born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Literally grew up, picking tobacco. I don't know, I'm not really sure what happened with the father. Basically was raised by the grandfather, was like a sharecropping farmer, super poor, dirt floors, the whole thing, the outhouse, the whole bit. Married very young, had children from age 16 to 35, my father being the last. They divorced. He was a total madman, like I said, bootlegger, coal miner. He went that way, she went this way. Well, what did she do? Like many people, she moved up to the city. She moved to Chicago. Where did she move? She moved to Highland Park, where I now live, and worked as a maid. So in 1954, in the very city where I live in a nice big house, my grandmother was working as a maid, on her hands and knees cleaning some rich person's floor. She was fired from that job, and her and my father lived in a car in Highland Park, where I live, for a month. Why she tried to get another job. She eventually couldn't get a job. What do? They banged into the city, and she found a job with Sunbeam, where she worked till she retired. So that's the classic story, right? Yeah. The poor Southerner moves up to the big city, gets an industrial job, and gets absorbed in that culture. And what do they want to do? They want to throw off the yoke, the stain of poverty. They want you to forget about all that. And so even if you're, as a kid, you bring that up, you get these really glossy stories. Oh, it was hard, or, you don't get the real story because they don't want to talk about it.
So at what point in that discovery do you start to see the beauty in the ugly? That's the thing I'm always fascinated by, is that when someone can look at the harsh truth of life and see that it's actually in some ways quite gorgeous because it's so tarnished and dirty and messed up. And
I guess I'm slightly on the other side of the equation, like and I'm not putting this on you, but there's a lot of people I know who love, like, Bukowski as a writer. Yeah. And I like Bukowski as a writer too, but I'm less attracted to, like, the dirt that you find underneath the dirt that you find underneath the dirt underneath the bed. I'm more attracted to the human will to survive, endure, and prosper. And so that classic story, which is the Muddy Waters story, or in the case of my grandmother, her story, that story of, like, I got to get the hell out of here. Like, this is not who I am. I don't want to be the person who lives with a dirt floor. You know what I mean? I want to be the person who has a nice house and a clean house and a nice car. The middle class dream. I'm more attracted to what that is, because as I've gone through life, and I've certainly, prospered well, I had to navigate my own weird middle class, I don't know, pretense. It's a lack, when you grow up poor, you hear all these stories about the way the rich live, and well, one day you're that person. You're arguing with some guy at a luxury car dealership about the rims or something. Even my grandmother could never even understand the kind of money I was making, because to her it was, she broke her back for years and years and years to make nothing. So point is I had to kind of reverse engineer because I leapt over the middle class story. I went from basically, lower middle class to being affluent by the time I was in my mid-20s. And I've been lucky in that I've never had to go back. But the point being is, I still brought all those values with me. Just because somebody's at the country club doesn't mean they're a bad person. Just because somebody's born on the wrong side of the tracks doesn't mean they're a bad person. We all work with bias. Class bias is, racial bias is obviously a big hot button topic, as it should be in our world. But class bias is something that's of the ages. The classic mythological tale about the person who gets brought out of poverty and they turn into the person that they hated. They turn in, Charlie Chaplin made a lot of those movies where you turn into the person that you thought you'd never be. That's a class thing. And that is something that's sort of apolitical.
And that's what I was going to ask you next. At what point do you feel like this is, what we're really talking about is a reclamation of patriotism in music, where if I say, as a queer man in America, if I say to one of my friends, I feel like I'm patriotic American, they say, what the hell is wrong with you? And they give me all the reasons why I shouldn't feel.
Yeah, right.
And I'll say, I'll interview a country artist or a folk artist, and I'll say, I really dig this band. And they'll say, why? They stand for everything you're against. And I'll say, this is about music. This is about, I'm here to reclaim the music that belongs to all of us.
Yeah.
That's not polarized by a small group of opportunists who turn it into a political football.
Yeah, good point. Best way I can say it is I grew up like many people. My family is essentially classic liberal, and certainly socially liberal. I'm certainly socially liberal. Never had a problem with that. I grew up sort of seeing America as kind of against my world. I bought into the story, and there's plenty of truth to it, that the man, whoever's running stuff at the top of the food chain, doesn't really care about people like us. And then I found myself on the other side of the wall and realized that it's a lot more amoral than I could have ever imagined. It's a lot colder than I could have ever imagined, but it's also in many ways not personal. It's more about power dynamics than it is about social dynamics. Social dynamics becomes the way we voice a lot of these things, as it should be. Every oppressed class deserves to be heard. But I think what we're having in America now is we're losing sight of the one core thing that I would argue we cannot lose sight of, which is, at least to my understanding, America is the greatest upwardly mobile opportunity machine that man has ever created. I'm living proof. I had no friends. I couldn't call anybody out in LA. My band literally made it from the club to the Madison Square Garden. As a rock and roller, that's the dream, right? Madison Square Garden, cover of Rolling Stone, #1 album. We did it. Nobody stopped me. Now, there's lots of reasons for somebody to say, well, you had opportunities other people didn't have. I wouldn't argue against that. All I know is in my own individual story, I was able to move from here to very far up the food chain just based on will and ability. So I know for a fact that it is possible. And I could, of course, cite 1,000 other examples that illustrate that the most powerful people in our country are people who, like me, have decided that this beautiful country affords that opportunity. To the wider scope of the thing, I would also remind people, having grown up in a socially liberal a place like Chicago, and here we are in New York, also very socially liberal, that a lot of the country doesn't move at that pace. It's not a media pace. It's a neighbor pace. It's the guy you know across the street or the gal you go to church with. And that gets lost sometimes. The way information travels, the way people sort of bend their head around ideas, it has to go through a totally different prism. If you want to attack the prisms by which they sort of view the world, whether it be the church or the community center or the local basketball game, well, even if you have a point of why you want to attack those systems, you're not replacing it with anything. If you go out in the middle of this country, which I did on these trips and which these songs come from, you realize, you go to many towns in America, there used to be a factory on the edge of town where Grandpa worked and his grandpa worked. Those factories are gone. they're left with vape shops, empty stores. It's not being replaced with anything. So like Obama called them bitter clingers, hanging on to their Bibles. Well, you're not giving them anything else to hang on to. So if we're as a country going to move forward together, which is ultimately the great argument that we need to make, we need to move forward together, we need to understand that America as a sort of idyllic place, never fully realized, still affords the opportunity for mobility. And the message we certainly need to send into the rural communities of our country is we need to give them a message of hope and opportunity, not, hey, that stuff that you believe in doesn't mean anything, because they look out their window and they see the fields that their grandfather's grandfather used to till, and they heard the same stories I did about dirt floors and outhouses and all that Southern Gothic shit. And that's most of the country. Most of this country lives outside the cities. I think it's about 60%. So whatever political arguments lay in the minefield of all that, it's still about whether or not you can reach emotionally those people to vibrate on the frequency that they have, which is like, well, what are you selling me? And that's where music is so beautiful, is it has a unifying sort of voice in there. And I found for myself personally, by going back into that part of the world, reconnecting with the world that I grew up in, it wasn't so much that I wanted to return to it, I really wanted to try to drag it forward. As my friend David has said a few times in the last few days as we've driven across America, it's like, would it be amazing if somebody like Amazon would start going into some of these communities and use them as test communities? Okay, we're going to pick 10 cities in America, and we're going to blow a bunch of money in these communities, and we're going to create the new downtown America for the 21st century. Let's figure out how to get tech sector jobs in here. Let's build new communities. Let's get the downtown rocking again, get people shopping, get a sense of civic pride. Create what Disney wanted to do with Epcot Center, trying to create the city of tomorrow. There's incredibly beautiful infrastructure out there in America that's laying fallow because it's been abandoned by all the industrial masters. They don't need them anymore. And yet we have this massive infrastructure just laying there, rotting. And you go to Europe and you're standing in front of buildings 400 years old. So obviously they made the decision not to tear it all down, even though they tried to blow it up a few times. Or they rebuilt it. Anyway, that's a long wrangle around your answer, but that's how I feel about it, and that's where the music kind of comes from. It's this attempt to kind of put some sort of poetic bow around this longer, way longer 200, 300 year struggle of like, what is America? What are we really trying to say? Can we come together and find some sort of new message of opportunity that unites us underneath one banner or flag? Going back to the music of the Dust Bowl or Hank Williams or the music of what I would say my people, the people that I grew up around, hearing that the Quicksilver banjo sound of a Ralph Stanley or a Scruggs, there's something that goes on in my brain that makes me understand that Friday night, after you worked in the field all week or at the factory, that was your night, and that's where that music comes from. It's the voicing of that sort of angsty thing of like, am I ever going to get out of here? And the blues and all that, it all comes together, and somehow I'm trying to find some sort of modern version of that. I don't know how that voices other than it seems to voice itself in the songs. And I could sit here and talk about it for 3 hours and I still wouldn't get at what I'm trying to say in the songs.
But I think you've done a pretty good job, because what I hear in the music of this record is someone who is reckoning his life from square A to this point, and trying to find a way to connect the dots in a way that has reverence, has respect, sees it for what it really is, and again claims it as part of your history. To go all the way back to where we started, there's a huge difference between this and a Pumpkins record, because this is so intimate. Even though Pumpkins is you, depending on who you're working with, it's a bigger sound. This is only you and only your life, and nobody is around you because nobody knows what you've seen. And nobody could give these songs bones the way you do all by yourself. And so I think that's something to say.
Thank you. That's very kind. Yeah.
It's honest. It's
I was thinking I was playing on stage the other night, and I was flashing back to being in the bedroom. Where all my dreams are about. Being like The Cure or something. You know what I mean? If you would have gone back in a time machine and told me that I'd one day be on stage by myself for 2 hours, no accompaniment, acoustic guitar, piano, and a voice, and just singing songs. I wouldn't have believed you. I would have thought you were a space alien. I would never have thought I would have landed here, but I'm here. It's a great journey that way.
It's the purest version of you.
But that's not necessarily a good thing.